Okay, thank you very much. And happy spring, happy Passover, and happy Easter. We're saying happy and happy and happy. So how did we get to this place of experiencing that great joy and excitement and rebirth from the dead of winter? And how do we get to the place where we experience freedom out of a story that started in slavery? The Jews enslaved in Egypt. And now we say happy Passover. And how do we get to that place where we experience transformation and celebration of a resurrection from the story of a man crucified on a cross? And do these stories and events hold any significance for us today? Regardless of what we believe and what our connection to any one of these stories might be. And I'm using the word story in the format that I would say, tell me the story about your childhood. We share our histories and our past in the form of stories. So I'm not saying story to negate its existence, its relevance, or its historical fact or not. I'm leaving that all up to you. How we tell our stories and what stories are relevant to us. As metaphysicians, as people that practice religious science, we look for that metaphysical message that can come through any story that's presented to us. All of these stories are part of our historical context. They're around us right now at this time of year. So spring, this time of year, becomes a reminder that what appears to be dead and lifeless, places where we might be stuck or enslaved, places where we might have left things to be crucified or left for dead, can be transformed, can bloom again, and can be freed and resurrect. And this month's topic has been diversity and inclusion beyond otherness. These have been heavy issues the last couple weeks. There have been challenging things spoken to people from this platform, and there have been emotional responses to what has been said up here. So this week I was tasked with bringing all this together with the lessons of Passover and Easter. Are you ready? Reverend Terry, who we will be blessed to hear from next week, has told me periodically throughout the years that she has been my prayer partner that the job of a minister is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. Sounds like her. Well, I looked up the word afflict just to make sure what she was telling me, and I don't know that I want to go as far as to afflict anyone in the real meaning of that word, but I do understand that idea of pushing people out of their comfort zones, of encouraging people to stretch, to open their mind a little bit further, their hearts a little bit further, and to possibly feel a little uncomfortable in that process as we seek to become more and more what it is that God wants to be expressing in and through us. And I think this month we've been doing a pretty good job of pushing people beyond their comfort zones. So I figured, why stop? Let's just push a little further. So I found an article in the Spirituality and Health magazine for May and June of this year. The author of this article is Rabbi Rami Shapiro, and what happens in his section of this magazine is that people send in questions and he answers them, much like our Jesse Jennings does in the Science of Mind magazine, and they think rather similarly. I love reading both of them. So one of the people wrote in and asked him, saying, I thought in the past that celibacy was the cause of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, but now we're seeing it show up in other places where celibacy isn't the issue. And so the question that was presented to him was, what leads priests and pastors and others to engage in this kind of behavior? And so the answer is what I found quite interesting, so stick with me. The first word, his response, was God. And then he explained that when we perceive of God as the guy in the sky that has absolute power over everyone, those who represent that God take on that position of having absolute power over. And it's the power over that creates this situation. And so what he says in here is, imagine women, men, and children of every religion, race, ethnicity, caste, gender, sexual orientation, etc., creating new spiritual communities based on egalitarianism, reciprocity, respect, love, and justice, rather than dominance, hierarchy, discrimination, fear, and prejudice. And then he says, now move beyond imagining and act. When I read that, I went, wait a minute. I thought about our communities and what New Thought is all about. The New Thought communities, as far as I can see, are about creating new spiritual communities based on egalitarianism, reciprocity, respect, love, and justice. And so for me, that was exciting to see in a magazine like this, not connected to any denomination, that what was being proposed is that we create new spiritual communities based on a different way of relating to God, what we call God. And so I wanted to really emphasize the fact that it's not the maleness, it's not what I was talking about 2 weeks ago, the whiteness that's the problem, it's the dominance. It's that seeking absolute power over as opposed to shared power and expression and energies. And so, that being said, I wanted to really refocus on what it is that I'm all about and what I think a lot of us here are about, and that is creating that world that works for everyone. That includes everyone. And the way that I see us doing this is by applying our principles everywhere that we go, taking our principles with us when we go out into the world, when we go to work, in our relationships, and of course, bringing those principles here as we interact with each other. So what I know and I've experienced is that guilt and shame and blame do not lead to healing. Those aspects have not been things that we have seen create healing in people's lives. And what we stand for and what we strive to do here is to stand for something and against nothing. And so a couple of weeks ago, when I was reading from the articles that I got on how to be an ally for other communities that we might not have been familiar with, one of the pieces I had to leave out for the interest of time, and I thought I would share them this week, has to do with the role of guilt and what happens when we move into that space of guilt and shame or trying to blame. And part of what they said is that guilt creates paralysis. Guilt is where most of us get stuck. And so if you think about it, as we learn about history from the perspective of other people and their experiences, we could be tempted to move into a place to go, oh, I'm taking on guilt and shame around my historical ancestors and our past. And what these articles were saying, so they didn't need religious science to figure this out, but what we know is that guilt doesn't lead to healing. And so they were saying guilt is the ultimate obstacle in the personal journey of being an ally, that it's important for us to work through any guilt that we feel before we can actually stand with someone. And this is where I say take our principles. We don't stand with people against anything because we don't stand against things. But we take the principle of standing for something and stand with someone saying, what is it you stand for? How can I stand with you to achieve or accomplish or gain this? And that's where the healing process then can take place. So as I thought about that, I thought about bringing it into a more personal expression. Think about any relationship that you're in. Has anyone ever been in a relationship with someone who didn't do things exactly the way you thought they should do them? Okay, maybe a few of you. So imagine this scenario. You go to your partner and you say, honey, it really bothers me when you leave the dirty dishes in the sink. Or, I'm really tired of walking over your clothes on the floor. Is there anything we can do about that? Or the one that I've always heard too is, can you please put the toothpaste cap back on the toothpaste? It really bothers me when you leave it off. So the intent of that expression is usually, can we find a solution? Can we move forward in some way? And I'm just picking sort of traditional things that we hear go on in relationships. But then your partner goes, oh, I'm such a bad person. I'm terrible at being a partner. I am the worst partner ever. Your response then starts to go, no, really, it's okay. It's not that bad. So do you see what's happened? Is by moving into guilt, it allows for, and this is something else they said in those articles, the maintaining or the maintenance of the status quo. We're not moving toward healing anymore. We're just going, okay, it's okay. Don't go that far. Don't go off the deep end over how bad this really is. They also said that guilt then puts the one who's presenting the issue in the position of having to comfort the person, as opposed to the two people being able to work out a resolution to the situation. So I brought that to the personal relationship because I believe that, again, what we deal with on a personal level then translates out into how we deal across cultures and societies and in different groups of people. So guilt, moving into guilt or shame, doesn't lead toward a positive or healthy outcome. It shifts the whole dynamic. And so the two main issues that I want to really emphasize is that in connecting with others, those that we have considered other in different places than we are, different experiences than we are, it's important that we stand for something and against nothing, taking our principles out there with us. We take the light of this philosophy. And we realize and we know that guilt, whether we take it on ourselves or whether we try and dish it out through blame, doesn't serve. Ernest Holmes spent quite a bit of time in the section of the Science of Mind text called From the Teachings of Jesus, going through the story of the prodigal son. And the reading that Martha did earlier is also from that section. He takes that story and explains it in what I find is a very interesting way. So you might want to read the whole thing. I'm just going to give you some excerpts from it. And this section is under self-condemnation. And this is the part where the son who, if you don't know the story, there are two sons. They divide the inheritance, and one son decides to leave the land that his father lives on and take it out into the world. And as the story goes, he squanders it all. He has nothing left and realizes he'd be better off if he'd stayed or go back to his father's home and just ask to be a servant, because that would be better than being out here with absolutely nothing. And as he comes to that realization, he says he will go back and say to his father, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and I am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And this is what Ernest Holmes has to say about that. This represents a theological state of mind which is quite common to all of us, one of self-condemnation and personal distrust. It is morbid and detrimental to our welfare, a theological state of introspective morbidity, which might be classed as one of our worst mental diseases. Self-condemnation is always destructive and should never be indulged in by anyone. It is always a mistake. Now, if you've read any Holmes much, you'll notice that he doesn't use the words always and never very often. But in this statement, he said, self-condemnation is always destructive, should never be indulged in by anyone, and is always a mistake. There is no question but that all of us have done that which is not for the best. All of us have made decisions or choices that maybe weren't in our best interest. As Reverend Bram was talking about last week, we want to raise to that vibration of love, and that love is what he now understands is the aiming of the target. So when we talk about sin missing the target, anything that misses love, and misses that vibration is essentially could be considered sin. And that's what Holmes here is talking about too. From this viewpoint, he said, all have been sinners because we have fallen short of the divine calling. We've fallen short of the divine calling. If we have sinned, it is because we have been ignorant of our true nature and because experience was necessary to bring us to ourselves. Further on, he talks about and has another heading, God does not condemn. And again, as we think about this story, he's talking here about the response of the Father to the Son who returns. And he's equating that to the response of the universe to us once we decide to aim again for that divine calling, to allow that true nature that is us to be expressed. And this is what Ernest Holmes says about that. The great lesson to learn here is that God never reproaches and never condemns. God did not say to the returning son, you miserable sinner, you are no more worthy to be called my son. He did not say, I will see what I can do about saving your lost soul, and I will spill the blood of my most precious son in hopes that by this atonement your life may be made eternal. Yeah, Ernest Holmes wrote this. This isn't me. He did not say, you are a worm of the dust, and I will grind you under my feet in order that you may know that I am God and the supreme power of the universe. And now Holmes moves into capital letters. No, God did not say any of these atrocious things. What the Father did say was bring forth quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And Ernest Holmes interprets that as, here Jesus is showing that God is love and knows nothing of hate. So again, an example where self-condemnation, where blame, moving ourselves into a place of guilt and shame doesn't bring about the healing and forward movement that we might be looking for. And as I was putting this together and looking at this passage, it dawned on me, if blame and shame and guilt worked, we would be in an amazing situation right now, wouldn't we? If it had worked, if that was the method, things would be really different in a lot of our lives. So again, back to those articles that I was sharing with you a couple weeks ago. One of the things they talk about in there is the importance of doing any work that we do from a place of self-love, as opposed to guilt and shame. This is a sentence from one of the articles. We need to love ourselves and others enough to forge new ways of being. Just like what Rabbi Shapiro was saying, new communities, new ways of being. Reverend Bram said last week, I raise to the vibration of love for myself and for others. So again, as we think about self-love, we can also think about self-love as what does work toward healing. So Rabbi Shapiro also said in there, imagine new spiritual communities based on egalitarianism. And so I was thinking about, what does that look like? How would that look? And I remembered seeing on the internet some pictures, and if I had the technical abilities, they would be displayed there. So you're going to have to look at my fun drawings. So the first picture is like this. There's a fence, and there's 3 people standing there. And the idea is that beyond the fence is something that they want to see. So again, depending on who put the drawing up, there's different things beyond the fence. And what I was picturing is, again, the metaphysical message here is that often in our lives, there are fences that have been created, barriers that are created to us seeing our all potentiality, to us seeing or realizing our ability to move into a space of self-love even sometimes. And so the first option is to give everybody the same size block to stand on. And as you can see, some of them might be able to see a little better over the fence, but there's still one that isn't seeing over the fence. And so the third option, and this is the one, they called that equality, and they called this one equity. Everybody gets the size block they need in order to see over the fence. Now, as I thought about this in regard to what it is we are thinking about and doing and teaching here, I realized that in my mind, and I didn't have time to draw it because it kind of came to me this morning, we are all born without a fence. That fence is developed as we grow. It comes either from what's taught to us, experiences in our childhood, or things that we've experienced and that we've created, sort of this barrier between us and our all potentiality, so to speak. And so I was picturing not just a level fence and different sized people, but I saw all the people the same and different levels of fence depending on what's been created in our life. The result, though, is still that we need different amounts of inner work, different amounts of shifting in our thinking to raise ourselves up enough to see over the fence. The other option that was presented that I really liked, I saw on the internet and that I was thinking about, is remove the fences. Then it doesn't matter how tall you are, no matter where you are, we want to get rid of those barriers. So what does that look like? But one of the things I wanted to point out is that when I am speaking from up here, I am not at all saying everyone needs to look at the fence at this level to make us all equal. That is not what I'm saying. Our principles say that there is all potentiality out there for everyone. My goal is to lift us up or remove the barriers, whatever it takes, to allow everyone to achieve and gain their highest potential, to move into that place of their divine calling. And so I wanted to use an example from my own experience. I grew up a girl. No surprise to you, I imagine. So in my day, many girls were told, girls can't do this. In fact, we were only allowed to wear pants one day a week because girls didn't wear pants. So we had to wear skirts, and when we were in skirts, we couldn't go on the jungle gym. We couldn't do other things because girls didn't do that when they were wearing skirts. So girls were told what they couldn't do. We had certain professions that we were told we couldn't do. Well, I was raised differently. My father didn't believe any of that, and so he refused for me to be told that. And he expected me to learn, and my brother, we learned the same things. We both had to learn to cook. We both had to learn to mow the lawn. He wanted me to learn how to throw and catch a ball. He did not succeed so well at that. But he wanted us both to learn how to sew. We were raised not letting gender determine what we were told we could and couldn't do. I was always told whatever I put my mind to, I could do. Later, as an adult, I attended workshops with other peers, women, and I realized that I had a fence that was maybe this high to hurdle, while others who were told they couldn't had the fence that was this high to hurdle. Because what was going on in our minds was different and created more of a barrier. And so this is where I would like to take us into the lesson that we can gain from Passover. I found an article online from AISH.com, and the article is called "The 5 Most Important Things to Know About Passover" by Rabbi Benjamin Blech. And the first thing has to do with memory. The first thing that Passover teaches us is the importance of memory. And this was very interesting to me. He said, it's from the Bible then, remember that you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Remember that the Lord took you out of the bondage of slavery. Remembering became a biblical mandate that had never seemed so important until the Passover story. And he points out in this article that history allows us to stand on the shoulders of giants. If you make a mistake once, you're human. If you never learn from what happened before, you're brainless. That's what he says here. So here, the story, the importance of the memory of the story is not to blame what happened, but to learn from what happened. That we take those memories of whatever we've experienced so we can learn from them and move forward. The second lesson is the importance of optimism. And this is the key that I think ties into what I was sharing about my experience. To study the Passover story in depth is to recognize that the most difficult task Moses had to perform was not to get the Jews out of Egypt, but to get Egypt out of the Jews. They had become so habituated to their status as slaves, they lost all hope that they could ever improve their lot. So again, think about that. What have we been taught or told? What ideas might we be holding on to that are still enslaving us, that are holding us back? And the key here was shifting the thinking to one of being free. And what does that look like? The next one is the importance of faith. He said here, a pessimist is, it's been said, is someone who has no invisible means of support. So the importance of faith and recognizing that with God all things are possible. He said that faith in a personal God gives us faith in ourselves, in our future, and in our ability to help change the world. And the last two messages from Passover are the importance of family and the importance of responsibility to others, and taking that experience and moving it into compassion for others as we move forward. I've summarized rather quickly. You can find that if you want to read the whole article. But to me, the key message there is that gift that we can take from the Passover story is to remember to learn from our past, not remembering to blame what happened in our past. But we remember in a way that builds optimism and faith, that heals us and moves us forward so we're in a better stance or better place to transform the world. And so now let's look at the lesson that we can gain from the Easter story. Years ago, I had a partner whose family said that on Easter morning you should wake up and greet people with, "He has risen," and the response is, "He has risen indeed." And so metaphysically, what are we looking at here? What has risen? What are we seeking to have rise in us? Ernest Holmes tells us that as the human gives way to the divine in all people, they become the Christ. And that is the meaning of Easter for us this morning. As the human gives way to the divine, each one of us becomes the Christ. As we roll back the stone of perceived separation, our Christ light shines. So again, there's that idea that that stone that's dividing us is this belief in separation, our separation from God, our separation from others. And so my question to myself was, what might I have crucified in my life? What might I have basically not allowed to flourish? What wanted to live, but I have allowed to be left for dead on some cross that I might have been bearing? What is seeking to be transformed and to resurrect today in my life or in your life? Ernest Holmes also said, and this is from the Science of Mind text, the spirit that raised Jesus dwells in us all. The spirit quickens on our mortal bodies when we let it. Here is the lesson in mental and spiritual healing. So again, taking a physical story and moving it into a mental and spiritual lesson for us, allowing ourselves to be quickened and brought back into the life that we were intended to live. And so I see us all seeking the ability to do that inner work, moving back into a place of self-love, not self-condemnation, releasing that, releasing the blame, the guilt, the shame, all of that, and allowing ourselves to remember, as Holmes also said, in the arms which are all-inclusive, divine love encompasses everything. So again, how did we arrive at happy spring, happy Passover, happy Easter? As we seek to find that happiness today, we take our new thought principles and apply them every place that we go, into every community that we're called to interact with. We remember that we stand for something, That is our focus and our goal. Remember that what we focus on grows. We remember that what we resist persists. So we take those principles out into the world. Whether we're called to be friends, in a relationship with someone, allies, community members, developing new spiritual communities, whatever it might be, we take these principles with us. And we glean from the metaphysical messages of the stories that are part of our past. We find happiness in the new life and rebirth from the dead of winter that is evidenced in spring and in the flowers and the beauty all around us. As we learn from and remember our history and our past and allow ourselves to be moved into optimism, we can say, Happy Passover. As we remember our connection with God and Spirit and love, we can transform our past and resurrect into the truth of our being for a happy Easter. And as we choose to rise to the vibration of love, we can say, Love has risen. And your response would be, Love has risen indeed. So let's try that. Love has risen. Love has risen indeed. And so it is.